Okay, so welcome to another conversation. So today I'm joined by Fernando Oshevsky, and I've been looking forward to this. Well, I should also say you go by the name Metaphysical Exile, which we'll get into. Obviously, some people will know you by that name. But I've been looking forward to this one for a while. I've watched Fernando's channel slash read his blog for, I was saying pre-recording. I actually don't know how long it is, but it's several years anyway. And yeah, I've always enjoyed it. And, now we're doing this because you've just released or just finished your thesis, or it's been published, or at least I was recently made aware of it. Um, and yeah, I wanted to learn more about it because it's not fully in English. Um, but before we get into your thesis, I'll hand over to you to, introduce yourself how you like, and how did you first come into contact with the ideas of antinatalism and philosophical pessimism?
I first, which is, I mean, it's an academic interest of mine, but it's also a very personal interest of mine as well. I mean, it started as a personal interest and then it developed into academic. I was lucky enough to be able to, get those two together. Not a lot of people get to
Yeah,
do that. I wasn't always a pessimist or I didn't always have this outlook on life, existence, and everything else. Uh, it started around my late 20s. To make a long story short, my first degree, I got a bachelor's in economics. I was going to go to grad school for that too, but you know, things didn't work out the way I thought they were going to work out. I started hating
yeah,
it. And my personal life, I started, uh, you know, getting really down. And eventually, my mom gave me a couple of Nietzsche's books. And I used to hate philosophy up until that point in my life. Like everything, like philosophy to me was just like that cliche thing about how philosophy is the mother of all, you know, modern science. And I always thought, you don't need philosophy anymore. You just talk about individual sciences like biology, physics, chemistry, and humanities. I mean, like history or something like that. But you don't need, philosophy is just crap. That's what I thought. At that point, like I was turning 30. I'm 41, by the way, and I I really I was lost in life, and I didn't know what to do. And but I was kind of privileged enough to be able to actually stop my life and read those books. And then I started. That was really interesting. I thought, oh, this guy is onto something. But this whole idea of especially like in the late 19th century, the whole idea that the death of God and the death of all the idols
mm,
and exposing the meaninglessness of everything. But I also had a problem with how he was, to use Cioran's words, which I found out about later, how how Nietzsche was smashing the idols and substituting them for other idols, And I guess I intuitively wanted something. Uh, I wanted to see if there were thinkers that were pessimistic. Like that's the word. I didn't know at the time, but I started seeing that he talked about Schopenhauer a lot in his writings here and there, and a lot of the footnotes talked about, oh, Nietzsche is talking about how Schopenhauer said that, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna start reading this guy. So I started reading Schopenhauer, and from Schopenhauer, I got eventually to Cioran, and then I saw online there were a lot of people talking about this thing, antinatalism. I was like, oh, cool. I mean, I never, it was something that never even crossed my mind that was
Mm,
possible to defend. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
holy crap. I mean, how does one defend this position? And then I was hooked. From then on, I was hooked. And I was able to go back to university. I took entrance exams. I did horrible, but thankfully, I didn't want to go to something like that that's highly competitive, like med school or law school or something like that. So I went to philosophy, uh, got my bachelor's. I did a monograph, I think it's called in English. I think it's that. Like it's like a
I don't know.
thesis. It's like a thesis, but it's only smaller, and
Okay.
it's not. It doesn't have to be as original.
Yeah.
It's like a paper that you have to produce to finish the bachelor's over here, and I did one on Cioran because my academic advisor had a book about Cioran over here and in Brazil, and I just and after that I went to get my master's grad school, and I got interested in that, which we're going to talk about in a bit.
Mm,
The How certain uh, religious expressions from the past inf- uh, influenced or helped shaped the philosophical pessimism for Schopenhauer and eventually Cioran. Uh, I kind of regret. I should have done just one or the other. Uh, I think the work would have been better, but it's just
mm.
I like both philosophers, and I thought I want to
Yeah.
do something more broad, and so. But anyways,
Yeah, and it leaves it open for you in the future to go more in depth, right?
yeah,
Now you've kind of like laid out the sort of general landscape of the terrain.
yeah,
So, and then you can do deep dives in the future if you'd like, or help other people to.
yeah. Uh, and that's it. I guess that's the background. I
Yeah.
used to hate philosophy, and then eventually I hit a point in my life where I started questioning everything and fell in love with it, and that's it.
Yeah. Bit of a character arc, as they say.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, so before we get into your thesis, I mentioned at the start that obviously some people will know you under the name Metaphysical Exile. Where I think you write about this somewhere, but just for anyone who doesn't know, where did you get that name from, and why did it kind of resonate with you enough for you to use it?
it's from Cioran's work. Um, I actually wrote it down here. Uh, it and there's a couple of books. I mean, I read almost all of his books. I didn't read all of his books. There's one that it's just gigantic, like the letters like that were published posthumously, and I only have it in French, and my
Mm.
French is horrible. So I can't really. I mean, I try, but I manage, but it's just for reading. But it's yeah, it's too big, and yeah. But anyway, it's a couple. There's a couple of quotes of Cioran, and I'm just going to read them here. The first one is from "The Trouble with Being Born," and it goes like this: "Quote: All my life, I have lived with the feeling that I have been kept from my true place. If the expression metaphysical exile had no meaning, my existence alone would afford it one." End of quote. The second one is from an earlier book of his, On the Heights of Despair, and he writes, quote, "What is the anxiety of nothingness if not the perverse joy of our final sadness, our exalted love for the eternity of nothingness and the transience of existence? Can it really be that for us existence means exile and nothingness home?" End of quote. And that idea of metaphysical exile, it resonated with me, and it has everything to do with what I eventually researched for my thesis, because there is this feeling. Uh, it's sort of a religious feeling, although I'm not religious. But it's a philosophical feeling. It's a feeling that there's something wrong, right? There's something.
Hmm.
I mean, you see this feeling with other philosophers as well, like Petter Wessels-Apfel, the Norwegian philosopher. Uh, this idea that man, mankind, humanity, we we're animals that eventually develop like a deep sense of, like a deep consciousness. Like we need, and we want to find answers, but
Hmm.
there aren't any. You know, the metaphysical exile. The idea is that we want bigger answers. We want like something that is going to make everything make sense. Like all this chaos, all this uh, degradation, death, the pain, uh, wars, diseases, all of this human drama, and animal drama as well. It has to make there has to be something else, and I think that's where a lot of religions come from and mythologies and everything.
Hmm.
And the idea is that there is no answer. There is nothing. I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothingness. We come from nothing. I mean, there's a lot of people going to say, "Well, I remember my past life. I remember when I was a soul in heaven before." I mean, I don't believe that. I mean, it's a matter of faith. They can't prove it, and it's a sad situation in which we find ourselves. The animals, it's, I mean, nature itself is a slaughterhouse, but they don't know it. We do. We got to the point that we do. We understand the futility of it all, and uh, we wish we had some greater purpose for this, and uh, we're exiles from somewhere, but this somewhere is not. It's not anywhere. The that's the point. The metaphysical, it's not. It's as if we were from somewhere else, like the we're gonna talk about like the Gnostics, or a few religions discuss this, that our essences, our metaphysical essences, they are imprisoned in the physical world, and
Hmm.
we need to do whatever, worship this way or act this way, or discover a secret knowledge that will eventually free our spirits, souls, or whatever you want to call it. Only problem is there is this is just a fantasy. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing there. It's pretty
Yeah.
depressing,
It's
right?
like
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's like it's fictions we construct to try and cope with the fact, even if it's, subconsciously so. We're trying to cope with the fact that, there is no order out there and our lives are ultimately meaningless.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, the term exile, it kind of makes me think of the idea that, we're kind of cast into the universe and we're almost like refugees of our own lives, if that makes sense.
yeah.
It's kind of like this weird, um, yeah, I don't know how else to describe it, but yeah, I think it's a really like nice name, and it's drawn from somewhere where any, philosophical pessimist is going to recognize. Um, so let's get into the main like subject matter then, your thesis. So um, if I'm getting the English name correct, it's Pessimism and Gnosis, Schopenhauer, Cioran, and the Appropriation of Anti-Cosmic Religions. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool,
Yep.
cool, cool. So, can you give us like, so the abstract is available in English and I'll put it in the description so people can read it, and obviously I'll link to the thesis itself. But the thesis itself isn't available fully in English. So for those of us who only understand stuff in English or at least don't know Portuguese, what's like an overview of your thesis? What's like the structure? What is the main sort of message and things that you were researching?
While researching for my bachelor's monograph paper, I kept seeing this recurring theme of them talking about both. It was mainly about Cioran, but I also brought Schopenhauer into it. They use a lot of religions and religious lingo several moments in their work, and I got very interested in seeing how they were influenced by it and how they use it to advance their own. That's why I say appropriation. Uh, it's not exactly a stealing, but it's like they're taking for themselves and transforming that stuff. Uh, Not exactly transforming, because a lot of the way they use it, I agree with. Uh, Even though some of the professors that I discussed this with don't exactly agree with. They don't see it, a lot of these religions, as pessimistic. But I even though I agree with them, I always I was always careful to, when I was talking about these religions in a pessimistic, in a philosophical pessimistic sense, not to use my own words. I always try to use Schopenhauer's words or Cioran's words, you know. And yeah, the idea came from this. I wanted to see how um, these religions influenced their views, and how to use those religions to further their point about existence being this horrible thing, and how we should reject existence, and even topics such as antinatalism, which they didn't have that word, but they sure have the philosophy in there. I mean,
I kind of want to go through it and like break each part down. So starting with the religions themselves, if someone's never come across this term before, anti-cosmic religion, what specifically is an anti-cosmic religion?
anti-cosmic religions. Uh, the I've seen while I was doing my research, the name of the thesis wasn't, the title was going to be different, but then I came across, while reading some of the authors that I use other than Schopenhauer and Cioran, I saw them using this term, anti-cosmic religions, anti-cosmic. They were talking about how this particular religion is anti-cosmic, and I think the first author I saw using that expression was Hans Jonas, which is a famous philosopher, and has a very important work about Gnostic religions. But there were others that also used this expression. I think, and I'm going to butcher this name as well, Mircea Eliade, which he was actually a friend of Cioran's from Romania. And he was a scholar of religion and mythology. And he doesn't use anti-cosmic religions, but he used acosmic. But the idea is the same. In a nutshell, there are religions or schools or sects of several different religions that treat the world, the physical world, the physical universe, the cosmos that we're inserted in, we're born in, as prison for our essences. That kind of describes a lot of religions, even religions that treat the world as a perfect creation of a benevolent God. But the, these anti-cosmic religions, they don't treat it as such. They see the world as vile, as corrupted, as horrible, as a place that, when they do have a creation story, because some of them don't, it's almost always, I think always, the world is a creation of an evil god or an ignorant god, such as the demiurge in Gnostic religions. And but not only Gnostic, I think Marcion, it's not really considered Gnosticism, but he also talks about this. It makes a distinction between, and here we're talking specifically about the Christianity, early Christianity, a distinction between the Old Testament deity and the New Testament deity, and the idea of an alien God, not alien as in extraterrestrial, but alien as in a different, this different power that comes to rescue us from this deity that imprisons us in a physical form. And anti-cosmic is that. Of course, there's a lot of similarities, because you have Schopenhauer talks about pessimistic religions and optimistic religions, and he clearly identifies, for instance, Judaism, Islam, Protestantism with 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 optimistic religions, because one of the features that he talks about a lot is religions that don't have ascetic practices, like the rejection of the world. You don't have a way. I kind of cheated. This was religions that don't have any sort of like monks or nuns that renounce the world and don't have children, and uh, renounce the self and all of that good stuff. And those religions are optimistic for him. And the pessimistic religions, which what he means is that they see the world of becoming, the you know instability. We're never at rest. We're always changing. Even if we just sit, we're always changing. We can't just sit and relax. We eventually have to eat and all that. And he sees the religions that reject this as pessimistic religions. Uh, but not necessarily. There, for instance, Catholicism. He's very critical of Catholicism, even though Catholicism has monks, nuns, and that live this, what he called the denial of the will to live, because even though they have that aspect, they also have the laity, and to him, it's just horrible, because they they encourage procreation, they encourage the secular life as well, which is kind of, and then I have my own personal grievance with this, because he doesn't really talk much about that, and when it comes to Buddhism, because Buddhism does the same thing. A lot of the Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana, you have the monks, but practicing asceticism and renouncing the will, but you also have the laity there. But anyways, in a nutshell, that's what I think. Did I explain? I think it's
Yeah. So anti-cosmic religions. So what I'm getting from you is that they're essentially religions that see our physical existence as something to be regretful about. We're
yeah,
essentially trapped in a prison that is defined by, um, you know, negative things, sadness, pain, things like this.
yeah.
Um, so, like, what is it? What's the diversity in these anti-cosmic religions like? So I can imagine there's some diversity in maybe like how they've come to this position. So you said that some of them have like a creation story and others don't.
Yeah.
So I can imagine. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, no. Just what were you
So
gonna?
what I was gonna say was like I can imagine like so this is an area that I still need to learn more about. So I might trip up over things here. So correct me. But my understanding is that like you said, so the Gnostics do have a creation story, but it's a negative one about the demiurge, right? But then maybe you have a religion like Buddhism, that has pronouncements like life is suffering or life is dissatisfaction, um, and perhaps it depends on the sort of strand of Buddhism that you're talking about. But my understanding is that Buddhism, it doesn't have to have a creation story. It
Exactly.
can just simply be a recognition of how existence is, and then maybe a set of practices to use to essentially deal with that, basically. So, like, yeah, but they both seem to be anti-cosmic, both Gnosticism and Buddhism. So, what's the diversity of these religions like?
I think you described it perfectly. Yeah, yeah. Buddhism, it does. I mean, the main strains, the main schools of Buddhism don't have a creation myth, but they still describe the world as sort of a hell. I mean,
Mm,
there are hells in Buddhism, but they all part of this samsara, this world of becoming, this world of you're never at rest. You're only at rest, and when
yeah,
you attain nirvana or nibbana.
yeah. You're a hungry ghost is one of the concepts they have, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you get to be reborn or reincarnated as animals too. I mean, it's just man is privileged because we're able to become monks, eventually attaining nirvana. That's that's uh,
Mm,
that's one of the advantages, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, are there any like I can imagine, and I think you've already said that, you know, there can be an anti-cosmic religion that isn't necessarily anti-natalist, which to any anti-natalist listening might sound weird because if you have that view of the world, why would you think that we should create more beings into it? So how do like anti-cosmic religions and anti-natalism overlap or not overlap? What is that Venn diagram like?
I think when it comes to asceticism, there is a lot of overlap,
Mm,
even in like Buddhism. I mean, but there are some expressions. I mean, I'm I'm not an expert, but I've tried to see if there was a perfect antinatalistic religion,
mm,
and it's hard to tell because a lot of these sects eventually got wiped out, especially when it comes to Christianity.
mm,
Like the Gnostics eventually were wiped out, and every time sort of a dualistic or a demiurgic uh, tradition came up in the Middle Ages. I think the most famous example is the the Cathars in southern
Yeah.
France. Uh, there are a lot of historians today that consider that Catharism didn't actually exist, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to assume they existed. For what we know, or what is told about the Cathars, is that they in, really encouraged non-procreation. But yeah, that didn't. It wasn't something that I think, because if that really were the case, then it would have ended like really quickly. If everyone who believed that, so I think it was also something that was expected of the those who were the elect, the elite, and, the which were the ascetics and basically the priests and the nuns. So as ultimately as a perfect antinatalist religion, I didn't. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. You have antinatalist teachings in a lot of these religions. It sometimes is really explicit. One of the today it's kind of, they don't really consider this a total Gnostic, a full blown Gnostic text, but there's a Greek gospel of the Egyptians in which uh, I don't remember who asks Jesus if uh, when how long will man have to endure mankind have to endure death, and Jesus answers, as long as women bear children. I mean, it's pretty explicit, and there are other texts that talk about how, and Cioran brings this up in some of his works, that other Gnostic texts talk about how, during procreation, the devils with the whole idea is that bringing someone to life is horrible. But to the extent that everyone took this super serious, I mean, we can't know that. It's really hard,
Hmm.
especially because back then the options for contraceptives were really,
Yeah.
and I mean, most people wouldn't uh, just adopt a celibate lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's like how loads of people are like this today. They'll say something is morally wrong, but they won't have the willpower to bring their behavior in line with that, right? And
Yeah,
this can be seen on like a whole range of things. So why would we assume that those people would be any different? And it's like all religions in the present day have concentric circles of like how strong people believe and how much they adhere to the teachings, right? You have like ultra religious people in the middle, and then there are other people who have very strong beliefs, and but then maybe they don't like dedicate their lives to it. Then you have other people who like, yeah, they believe in it and they identify it, but when maybe they don't practice all of the things it teaches. And then you've got other people who are maybe just sort of like nominally part of this religion, but it doesn't really dictate any of their sort of lifestyle at all. They were maybe just raised by parents that hold that religion. So
yeah,
I'm guessing it would kind of be the same in the past, maybe.
yeah. I think so. Yeah, there's one kind of regret not including that, but when I when I started reading more about it, I had already submitted my thesis. But
Mm.
there's one religion in the United States today. It's actually dying, and it is, as far as I can tell, fully antinatalistic. Which they're called the Shakers, and
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's like a brotherhood of Christians. They have a very sort of unique interpretation of scripture, of Christian scripture, but basically they live in communal lifestyle, and everybody's like equal, men, women. There's only one thing: no one is allowed to have sex or procreate. So basically, and they're dying out. But I guess they're dying out a lot. One of the main reasons is that they haven't been taking new converts for a long time. I think they started. I think I read somewhere that they are going to start. Uh, I might be wrong about this. That they are going to accept new converts, but then again, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, if you're super committed about like if you form a community of people that are very committed to this, and you're only there's just a finite amount of people, you're not bringing anybody from outside. It eventually gonna die out if everybody's super committed about it.
Yeah. And you know how you were saying particularly the Gnostics in the past they were wiped out. What character did that take? Was I'm assuming non-procreation was part of it, but were they also sort of killed off and persecuted?
Yeah, they were persecuted. In early Christianity, there were a lot of different strains of Christianity that were competing for the. I mean, I guess they weren't really competing, but it ended up being a competition that
Mm.
what we know as mainstream Christianity eventually won. And even mainstream Christianity that won, uh, it's not one thing. I mean, I come from, I mean, Brazil is a very Catholic, used to be a very Catholic country. So we always hear this story about, it was, everybody was just, all Christians were Catholics up until the Great Schism. And then there were Catholics and Orthodox. And then there were another 500 years, there was the Protestant Reformation. And it's not really true. I mean, you had different Eastern Christianities before the Great Schism, and you have Ethiopian Orthodox, and you have just a bunch of different interpretations that accepted this council and not this council. And
Mm.
it's like a mess. And before the first councils, it was an even bigger mess. The Gnostics, the Marcionists, uh, they were all. I mean, Marcion he was born in the late first century. He was the first Christian who tried to formulate a canon for the New Testament. And he was dualist. He isn't considered Gnostic because the way you get saved in his version of Christianity, you just have to accept Jesus and you're saved. Uh, but he shares with the Gnostics the idea that the world was created by an evil demiurge, and that Jesus' God is not the same as the Old Testament God.
One thing I was actually going to ask was if you had come across the Scopsi. I might
What
be saying their name wrong as well. If you've come across the Scopsi,
what is that? I don't know.
so they're a group I believe in um Russia. I think they are no longer around, is my understanding. I haven't. They're on my list of groups to look into, but I've seen them referenced quite a lot. And they go as far as to remove their
Oh
genitalia
yeah, yeah, the
as
ones that castrated themselves. Yeah.
yeah. And they were around pretty recently because there were photographs of them. So they were around, recent enough to, for there to be photography. Um, but yeah, I found them kind of intriguing. I'm guessing I'm guessing you maybe didn't mention them in your
No,
thesis.
no.
No. But yeah.
Yeah, because
Not yeah.
one of the I try to I thought about later. I thought about that I should have included the Shakers, but when it wouldn't have made a lot of difference because I was really trying to discuss the religions that I knew were mentioned by both Schopenhauer and Cioran. So
Yeah,
they don't
yeah,
talk about them. So uh, it would have been just sort of like a curiosity, you know.
yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It wouldn't be something that is connected to them. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So I another this is kind of separate from procreation and stuff like this, but when I've kind of looked into, you know, antinatalist history and stuff like this, and sort of, quasi antinatalist sort of beliefs in the past, often it's intertwined with a care for animals. And like a recognition of, animal suffering and things like this when maybe other people wouldn't. Like, is this at all reflected in anti-cosmic religions? Do you see, like, in anti-cosmic religions they're maybe more sympathetic to the plight of animals than other religions, or is there not really a correlation there?
Not in all of them, but there are not because it's just because there's a lot of there's a lack of historical knowledge about a lot of the minutiae of their beliefs and their practices. But there are some religions that I considered anti-cosmic in my thesis, such as Buddhism and Hinduism, that a lot of the schools, I think major schools, consider treating animals with respect, uh, either by not eating them or by not. For instance, I think Mahayana Buddhism is mainly vegetarian. Form of Buddhism. I think Theravada encourages this as well. Uh, but when it comes to uh, anti-cosmic religions that were wiped out, the Cathars, they abstained from eating meat except fish because they thought fish didn't reproduce through sex. It's the medieval times. They didn't understand
Yeah,
biology.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting though.
they believe that the souls, because the Catholics did believe in reincarnation and rebirth, so they thought, well, this could be, you know, my mother here, or you know what I mean, like
Mm,
she died, but she wasn't saved, so her soul is going to recycle through
mm,
other animals before she can become human again, and they had that respect for animals, except for fish, because they really
yeah,
thought
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fish were some sort of a different kind of being that just spontaneously occurred in water.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. I know, talking of different schools of Buddhism, so the local Buddhist center to me is called the Trirat. They are like what's called Triratna Buddhists, and I don't know how big a school it is, but they you don't have to be vegan to join, but they strongly encourage veganism. So the whole center itself is vegan. If you talk to all the people that are ordained and take it very seriously, a very good, a large percentage of them are vegan. Not all of them, but a lot of them, and the ones that aren't, see it as like an aspirational,
Yeah,
thing, like they want to be.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I found that very interesting because when I went there a few times, I didn't know the term anti-cosmic religion, but obviously I understood that they viewed life as you know essentially like when you're living, you're sort of like it's sort of like you just require hospice care. You know, it's like you're on your way to dying anyway in this, cosmic shithole. But,
Yeah,
but at least you can maybe meditate your way out of it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, anyway, um, so that's kind of covered anti-cosmic religions. I also wanted to ask about philosophical pessimism. So I think you mentioned this in the abstract, but I had a question down to ask you, like, what is and is not philosophical pessimism? Like, how do you distinguish it from other things?
It's a diagnosis. It can be, you can say it's a metaphysical diagnosis, even if you don't believe in a metaphysical world. But it's a metaphysical diagnosis that existence uh, is fundamentally problematic. It's fundamentally there's something wrong. There's something insidious about sentient existence. There's a mechanism. There's something. Different authors are going to provide different answers what that something wrong is, but
Hmm.
all of them are going to agree that there is something fundamentally wrong with sentient existence. And coupled with that diagnosis, there is an ethical prescription, not one, but there's several different ethical prescriptions. I think we're talking about antinatalism. Antinatalism is a famous ethical prescription of philosophical pessimism. It's not the only one. I mean, you have, for instance, you have Philip Mainlander. He advocated for non-reproduction, but he also advocated for suicide, which is, in of itself problematic to talk about. But those are, I think, the main points. If I can sum it up, existence is problematic. It's unfixable in a certain sense, because no matter how we advance in terms of material well-being or technological well-being, there's always going to be something about sentient existence that is going to be problematic. I think Cabrera talks is very good when it comes to this, because he describes existence as existing, a sentient existence, as you're always there's always an attrition. Like there's always you're never. It's not only that you're never at rest, but you're always getting pieces of yourself chipped away in a certain sense, even if either physically or morally or psychologically or whatever. You're always being attacked basically by just existing. And he goes so far as to say that that would be the case even if we were immortals, because he talks about the terminality of being, but terminality doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to die. I mean, if you could remain alive forever, I mean, it would still mean that you're gonna get that attrition always happening. Only you wouldn't see the end of it ever. So it becomes that thing about how immortality would eventually start waiting on you, like
Hmm.
you actually want to die eventually, because you want this to end at one point.
Hmm.
It might be nice for some people to live hundreds of years, but eventually you're going to want to, well, you're going to have enough of this,
Yeah.
unless you know then it comes back to Schopenhauer, because he was sort of an elitist. So he didn't think everyone was. He saw a lot of people from. He basically thought there were a lot of people who are just like brutes. They're never gonna get it. They might be living in like this hell world, but they're always gonna, if you give them an ice cream or something, like they're gonna think everything is fine. But anyway,
I wish it was that easy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'm actually working slash just finished a video script on um I guess you could kind of say a bit on philosophical pessimism, but basically the punchline of the video is that our lives are much worse than we tend to appreciate, than the average person tends to appreciate. And in it, I use this idea of us having like like sentient beings having this like center of gravity that they always like gravitate back to. And at the center of gravity is ill-being rather than well-being. So if we have to put active effort in to achieve good things that we can get to, right? And in the pursuit of those things we are in dissatisfaction rather than satisfaction. And once we get to those things, ultimately we're then pulled away from them again, and we've got to expend more effort to get to them. A very easy example is hunger or thirst, right? Like we literally could just sit here and do nothing, absolutely no effort put in, and we will naturally gravitate towards hunger and thirst, because that's just like that's our center of gravity, as it were. And we have to expend effort to find food, water, to nourish ourselves, and then we'll be satiated, but only temporarily, because we'll start gravitating back towards that pull towards ill-being. That just being one example, and that almost feels like the sort of core of philosophical pessimism, that at the core of existence is something negative. And we can find positive things in existence, but those things have to really be worked for, and they go counter to the sort of natural flow of existence, if you get what I mean.
Yep.
Yeah. And then obviously there's some philosophical pessimists who think there's no positive in existence. I mean, I personally agree that there aren't positives that we can appeal to in creating someone, but once we're here, there are positive things that we can sort of
Yeah.
navigate
Yeah.
to. But they don't make it worth bringing someone here. It's just once we are here, they're kind of like little life vessels that we can find, if you get what I mean.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, did you have something, or should I
No,
go on?
yeah, I agree. I agree. It's actually a very Schopenhauerian description of philosophical pessimism. This idea
Yeah.
that,
Well,
yeah, I
I've
mean,
been wallowing in it for this video script.
thirst, right? I mean, I've been drinking
Yeah.
water this entire time.
Yeah. 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 So, my next question was going to be like how anti-cosmic religions kind of present themselves in Schopenhauer and Cioran's work. Um, I feel like you've kind of covered it already, but I guess maybe to flesh it out a tiny bit more, is there a difference in how they use anti-cosmic religions to make their points, or do they kind of both use them in the same way?
They kind of both use it in the same way, but there's a difference, and it has to do with there's the way they use there's a difference, and it has to do with the way they argue their philosophies. For instance, I think the first major difference is Schopenhauer is a systematic philosopher, and Cioran is more like Nietzsche. He's aphoristic. He writes essays uh, that aren't very systematic. I kind of like that, by the way, but I like Schopenhauer as well because even though he's systematic, his prose is very good. You know, it almost doesn't feel like you're reading a system. Uh, but Schopenhauer's philosophy, he postulates that that all of existence is all of the empirical existence, like everything we see, or even ourselves, like our bodies, is all of that are manifestations of one will. We are all puppets of this will. Yes, we exist individually, but when we die, it's over. And what remains of us is the will. The will is basically what animates existence, not just of animals and humans, but even like the forces of nature, physics, gravity, all of that are everything is is a theater of the will, basically. And the will to Schopenhauer, for Schopenhauer, Schopenhauer inherited the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and he said that you can't know the thing in itself, which is the reality behind the phenomena, the noumena. You can't know that. You don't have access to that. Well, all we have access is the thing that we see, like which is idealism, the transcendental idealism. But Schopenhauer says, yeah, we can't directly experience the thing in itself, but through introspection, we can understand what this thing in itself is. And for Schopenhauer, it's the will, which is an irrational, blind force that just wants to manifest itself. It creates a sort of an order of the world, but it's deterministic. It has to be this way and no other way in order for it to manifest itself. So there is that in Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer considers philosophy, especially his philosophy, he calls it the doctrine of persuasion. And the religions he uses as pessimistic religions, he refers to them as a doctrine of faith. What he means by that is that these anti-cosmic religions that I call anti-cosmic religions and he calls pessimistic religions, they convey the same message as his philosophy, that we should all deny the will, stop reproducing, stop wanting things, basically become a monk, which is kind of funny because he never did that himself, but that's another story. He those religions convey the same message as his philosophy, but through myths, through stories, not through reasoning and logic and philosophy. But in the end of the day, there is something beyond the physical. It permeates the physical. It's not something like, it's not like a heaven away from us, something like that. It's an immanent metaphysics. Things are animated by this will. The will doesn't exist in somewhere like in the world of ideas, or like the Christian heaven or something like that. But and so there is a metaphysical aspect. Schopenhauer spent his entire life trying to actually prove that you could find proofs for that. He even there's actually a video that came out the other day. There's a channel called Esoterica, and it's really good. It's a really good channel, and Dr. Justin Sledge, he talks about different topics and occult philosophy and esotericism from a scholarly point of view. And he just released a video a few days ago, talking about how Schopenhauer spent many years trying to prove the existence of the will by analyzing occult phenomena. I mean, it's really sort of weird. In the case of Cioran, he pretty much agree. When you read him first time, second time, you don't get that, but you eventually see that he agrees with the more scientific worldview, the 20th century scientific worldview. Although he doesn't express himself in that way, he uses a lot of the language of metaphysics and religion. It's to Cioran, it's more of a how can I say? It's more of a metaphor. It's a good metaphor for existence. It's kind of like what Buddhism says, that samsara is horrible. We have to escape it. Only for Cioran, there's nowhere to escape. I mean, Schopenhauer as well. There is nowhere to escape because the individual self, what we perceive as a self, gets destroyed by death. So the whole denial of the will, becoming a monk or something like that, for Schopenhauer, it's more of like damage control
Hmm.
than really salvation. There's no salvation in Schopenhauer. You only control the little damage here, and maybe if you deny the will, you're gonna find some peace before you die. Cioran is not like that. I mean, he's actually kind of in some ways, not all the time, but in some of his writings, he condones a more how can I say this, a lifestyle that of pleasure, and but at the same time, he certain, and that's the point where they converge. Is that they both would agree that, for instance, procreation is a horrible thing. Perhaps not for the exact same reasons. Schopenhauer has the whole deny of the will and all that, but and but in the end of the day, I mean, whatever reason you give, the over the overarching reason is existence is suffering. Now, for Schopenhauer, existence is suffering because we are the manifestations of this will, of this metaphysical will, and blah blah blah. For Cioran, it's just suffering because it is. I mean, there's no. He's skeptical of metaphysical things. He thinks he's very. His philosophy is very, when it comes to it, there is no metaphysics in Cioran. I mean, even though he talks about it a lot, but he wish there was some metaphysical realm or whatever to escape to, but there isn't. Uh, Schopenhauer, it's the same thing. I guess I don't know how much they would agree. I know Cioran loved Schopenhauer, but at the same time, he could not believe that by logic alone we can infer, or by introspection we can infer that there's this will. I mean, it's just the way they present their it's just the way they present their philosophies, the way they where they stand on metaphysical issues. I mean, but I guess in the end of the day, it's just the way they present themselves. But basically, that's it.
Hmm. And I guess you've kind of already answered this a bit, but like obviously Schopenhauer and Cioran are going to diverge from anti-cosmic religions, right? Because I mean, I don't know if I'm being massively ignorant here, but I would assume they're both atheists, or at least not, believing in and any specific creator. Um, so I'm assuming that's a way that they diverge from at least some anti-cosmic religions. But is there sort of like a clear way that they sort of, they've drawn upon anti-cosmic religions for some inspiration or to use them as a tool to make a certain point, but is there a way that they sort of are also very much different, even though they share a sort of pessimistic evaluation of existence?
Uh, no, yeah, they are atheistic. I mean, they are atheists, both of them. Schopenhauer has this will, but this will isn't a god. It's not. It's just to him. It's a natural thing. It's the basis for existence. He is a metaphysician. I mean, he believes that for our empirical universe to exist, there has to be some underlying metaphysical aspect to it, which he calls the will. But he is atheistic. I mean, he would never believe. I mean, to him, and in that sense, they are in agreement. I mean, for Schopenhauer, the doctrine of faith of these pessimistic religions is a good metaphor. It's a good story, but it's not reality. Reality, it's his philosophy. His philosophy
Yeah.
is what describes reality as it is, as opposed to the mythologies. He sees some mythologies, some religions as espousing the same values as his philosophy, but all of the stories they tell, he completely disagrees with them.
Hmm.
And Cioran's going to be the same way. Only difference is not going to have the will or anything like that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
going to be chaotic.
Yeah. So you mentioned when we first started talking about your thesis about how you wish you kind of picked one of them so you could dive deeper. What what questions do you feel are left unanswered in your thesis? Like what if you were going to be able to write like a part two, what would you dive in deeper on, or what could maybe someone else pick up as a line of research?
Well, not so much in terms of religion. If I could do it over again, I would focus more on Schopenhauer. Even though I have a soft spot for Cioran, I would. There's more scholarly work and references when it comes to Schopenhauer. The Cioran being a closer to us in time, uh, and not so much religions, but I would want to explore, which is something that I hopefully, if I'm able to get a PhD, uh, the idea of nature. Um, when certain philosophers try to do this theodicy, which is they try to harmonize the existence of evil or the existence of suffering in a world where created by a just, omnipotent God and good God. I would want to explore how Schopenhauer, Cioran could be the same, but I think it would be easier and I think it would be more profitable with Schopenhauer. An an anti theodicy, but of nature, because Schopenhauer doesn't believe in a God. It would be not trying to harmonize, but trying to condemn nature in a way that which is something I think a lot of antinatalists and pessimists
Hmm.
we get a lot of this question. At least I get a lot of it that, oh no, you can't judge existence. I mean, you probably heard this like a
Yeah,
thousand
yeah, yeah,
times. You can't judge existence. Existence just is. And
yeah.
and to me, it's just when people say that they are judging existence. They're doing it implicitly, and they're approving of it. I mean, there's no, you, oh no, we can't judge existence. I mean, no, you are judging, you are approving of it. You're only doing this implicitly. The pessimists are just being honest about their, rejectionism.
Would you kind of see a similarity with some secular sort of theodicies as well? I know some people have pointed to people like, like I don't know how far I'd push it, but with people like Richard Dawkins, he very much. I'm assuming you're familiar with Richard Dawkins.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he very much obviously lays raw the sort of brutishness of nature and the fact that, um, like evolution by natural selection requires mass, victimization basically. A massive amount of sort of losers so that there can be some winners. In terms of genes, and obviously that lays a sort of trail of, suffering individuals behind it. But at the same time, he always he talks about the beauty of life as well, and this this kind of strikes me as like an almost, yeah, like a secular theodicy, and I don't know how it kind of what it shares and what it doesn't share with the um, theistic theodicy, but it seems like it is essentially they've essentially like the observation is the same in terms of what's happening, but the rationalization and the coping mechanism is different. Basically, one's theistic and one's atheistic. Um, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but like
No,
I see similarities in secular thinking as well.
I see where you're going. Yeah, he's not using a god. He's using
Mm,
nature. He's using a description of like a biological description of a. He's describing a mechanism through which life generates this diversity that we have in the living world, and his smuggling a judgment there, saying it's great, it's beautiful. I mean, the pessimists are going to say, well, yeah, it is beautiful, but this beauty has an insidious aspect to it. There's something wrong with this beauty. This beauty is it lies. It's the beauty of life lies to us, so we can keep playing this over and over and over again. So yeah, I agree that there is an aspect of a natural atheistic theodicy, if we can call it that, when Dawkins says that. My latest post for the blog, I read some of the some of the autobiography by uh, Charles Darwin,
mm,
and it's very dark the way he describes
yeah,
the lives and the sufferings of animals. He doesn't. I mean, he's talking more about God, but he doesn't strike me as someone who was trying to paint this light that nature is this beautiful, great thing. Um, it's something that my now former academic advisor and I are trying to uh, write this book of dialogue, uh, in which, I mean, this is just getting started, so we don't know if it's going to end up being a book or not. But we're going to try to write something that It's a book of dialogue in which one of us is going to defend a position and the other is going to defend another position. And so far, we settle in this format on this format. She is going to make a case that nature is good, but not good in the it's a positive thing, and I'm going to just use the authors like Schopenhauer, Cioran, and others to just say that no, it's a it's a death factory. Like it's a horrible thing, and I don't know how that's going to play out. It's something that I would like to explore because I feel that it's like I said, the whole idea that existence can't be judged, nature can't be judged, and I would argue that no, it's mankind. You're just a man trying to project your human values into something that isn't human. I would argue that when we see, for instance, just the other day, somebody sent me a video of a polar bear eating a seal,
Oh, I think I saw this exact video. Yeah.
and the seal was alive
Yeah, yeah, I saw this
while
video.
being devoured. And you can't imagine, like, the pain, like, it's just horrible. And a lot of people
Yeah.
say, well, but you're projecting your human values and everything. And I would argue that I think that any animal that developed consciousness like we do, like a lucidity, as Cioran calls it,
Mm.
will also see that as horrific. I mean, we can't
Yeah.
condone it, saying, "Oh, okay, it's nature and blah blah blah," but it is horrific. It is
Yeah.
just mind-boggling. The mechanism of nature that Dawkins makes excuses for because it's beautiful and whatever.
Mm.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think like when people say that we can't impose human values on animals, they're kind of like they're almost begging the question or smuggling, you know, an assumption in there, in that they say we can't impose a certain judgment onto another animal because it's a human judgment, when actually they're making a mistake. It's a judgment that's being made by a human, but that doesn't make it a human judgment. You know, all animals, at least with a central nervous system, share in the capacity to suffer, right? And so, why are we assuming and labeling it a human judgment simply because it's being made by a human? You know,
Yeah,
um, yeah, just like a dog can find things tasty and like to eat them, and not tasty and not like to eat them. Humans can also do that, but we wouldn't say that it's just a human judgment to be able to distinguish between what we like to taste and what we don't. You know, we recognize that other animals do that as well, given that they display preferences for foods and dispreference for other foods. If dispreference is a word, I don't even know if that's a word. Um, you know, so why would we not accept that for something as visceral as being eaten alive? This doesn't seem to me to be a human judgment. It's just a judgment that happens to be being made by a human, but it's obviously being made by that seal as well while they're being eaten alive.
yeah. If we could, I'm going to maintain this. I'm going to go to my grave saying this. If we could magically give that seal consciousness, or the seal's brother consciousness, and show that scene, the seal's brother is going to say, well, this is horrific. And I think if we could give consciousness to the polar bear, maybe not that one polar bear, but eventually some polar bear will say, look, this is horrific. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Oh, but then they would starve. See, but there's a difference between ethics, and there comes a point when we choose between ethics and nature. I mean, which is it's a problem I have sometimes with trying to derive ethics from nature, in the sense that, if it happens in nature, it's ethical. So no, it's not. I mean, we humans do things, stopped doing things because we realized they were unethical for some reason. Compassion, the idea of compassion. Either way, I think, like you said, it, it sure, yeah, it's a human because we're human and we're making it, but this judgment. But anybody could arrive at that judgment if they had the cognitive capacities that we have. That doesn't mean that they would all arrive at that. I mean, most humans look at that and don't care. So,
Yeah. But I think if they were in the SEAL's position, there would almost be universal
oh yeah,
agreement
yeah.
that's bad. Um, Before I ask my last question, I wanted to do sort of like a more quick fire one, which was, what are your favorite Schopenhauer and Cioran quotes? If you have a particular favorite, if you can make that decision.
Down one for each. Uh, I mean, I have a bunch of favorite quotes, but if you set luck, you have to pick one for each. And right now, I would pick these two. For Schopenhauer, this is from the second volume of Parerga and Paradipomena, which is his second major work after the World as Will and Representation. Uh, Quote, if we picture ourselves roughly as far as we can, the sum total of misery, pain, and suffering of every kind on which the sun shines in its course, we shall admit that it would have been much better if it had been just as impossible for the sun to produce the phenomenon of life on earth as on the moon, and the surface of the earth, like that of the moon, had still been in a crystalline state. End of quote. And for Cioran, this one is from The Trouble with Being Born. Quote, we do not rush toward death. We flee the catastrophe of birth, survivors struggling to forget it. Fear of death is merely the projection into the future of a fear which dates back to our first moment of life. We are reluctant, of course, to treat birth as a scourge. Had it not been inculcated as the sovereign good, have we not been told that the worst came at the end and not at the outset of our lives? Yet evil, real evil, is behind, not ahead of us. What escaped Jesus did not escape Buddha. If three things did not exist in the world, O disciples, the perfect one would not appear in the world. And ahead of old age and death, he places the fact of birth, source of every infirmity, every disaster. End of quote.
I've got to say, I don't think I knew the Schopenhauer quote that you used, and I think I've heard part of the Cioran quote that you used. Um, but they were both really good. The Schopenhauer the Cioran quote that I love the most, and I've sort of spoken about it in a few different videos, is it's very short, and I'm sure I'm gonna fuck it up nonetheless. But It is something along the lines of, I do not hate life nor desire death. I just regret being born. And I think that really sums up like my sort of feelings towards life, I guess, like I don't particularly hate my life. I'm quite privileged in the grand scheme of things if you consider everyone in existence today and everyone who has ever existed. Um, and yeah, I don't wake up every morning wanting my life to end. I'm happy for it to continue going. For now, obviously, in the future, as I age more, obviously, the situation may change. Um, but I regret being born in that I can recognize that, it would have been better just not to start this whole thing off in the first place. Now I'm here, I'm not miserable or anything like that, but, if I weren't created, I would have been spared all the bad things that have happened, and I wouldn't exist to care that the good things, aren't accruing to me. Um, so I really resonate with that quote from Cioran. But yeah, those are good choices. Um, so final question was about just where people can like find more of your stuff. So you obviously you write your essays for your blog and then you make a sort of audio version of those that goes up on YouTube. Obviously, I'll link all of that. Is there anything else that you do related to pessimism or antinatalism or anything else you'd want to speak about that you do currently, have done in the past, or are working on for the future?
I I have a book that I published uh, in Portuguese that I really planned on translating in English this year, but life got in the way. So
As it often does.
yeah, and I hopefully next year I'll be able to start this. I'm not gonna promise it's gonna be out, but it's the same thing as my essays. I mean, I'm the worst in trying to market my book, even in Portuguese, because I mean, if you read my blog, if you listen, I mean, you don't have it's the same ideas. I guess it has a little bit more of an autobiographical kind of vein to it, uh, but yeah, I mean, pretty much so far the channel is going to be that way. I was planning on doing something other than just reading my essays, but again, I'm kind of tired of I might in the future do something else, but for the time being, it's just going to be the readings. Uh, it already gets me to know, know a lot of people, new people that, I mean, I got to talk to you. I mean, it's just
Mm,
great. It's just great knowing that we're not alone in this kind of thinking. Helps. I think I've had people reach to me in Portuguese. At first, I thought the channel in Portuguese was just going to get destroyed and nobody's going to listen to it, and but I was wrong. I mean, a lot of people here in Brazil and Portugal and other countries that in the Portuguese speaking world contacted me and say, "Look, I think either I think just like that, or I agree with a lot of what you say, and but I can't really talk to anybody about it because they're gonna think I'm crazy, depressed, or something like that." And I'm like, it's good to reach out to people to know that yeah, a lot of us see the world as this insidious thing. I mean, but like you said, I mean, it's not like we wish to die anytime soon. I mean, we regret being born, but
mm,
since we're already here, we might as well try to do something about it. You know.
mm. Yeah, on your just quickly on your book, I don't know if you've sort of ventured into this space, but honestly, with translations, you can get a lot of the bulk done using AI translators, like DeepL. They're not perfect. Obviously, a human then needs to go through and correct it, but a lot of the bulk of the translation can be done. And also, to be honest, even if you wanted to get like a professional human to translate it, I'm sure if you did a crowdfunder, it would be successful. I'd be happy to share it and contribute. So I just wanted to, suggest those things so they're on your radar, so it can help you with a translation or something like that. Um, and yeah, if you do venture into new like avenues for your channel as well, I'm looking forward to all of that. But yeah, any links you want me to include below, I'll put them.
Uh,
Um, was there anything else you wanted to cover before we finish?
no, uh, I think that's pretty much covers everything.
Okay, nice. All right, well, I just want to say thank you again, one, for coming on and sharing your time, but also for everything else you do as well, like your essays. I haven't read your book because I don't speak Portuguese, but if the translation someday happens, I would love to read it. And if your time and schedule permits as well, I'd love to do an episode of Antinatalism Around the World on Brazil with you. But obviously, we can talk about that
Sure.
separately. But yeah, that would be amazing. Um, and yeah, thank you for everything you do, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you.